What you are about to hear is the story of Mikhail and Yelena, two lovers who defied a king and braved the frozen wilderness, proving that nothing can stand in the way of true love. It was a cold October night in ancient Russia, the kind of night where the chill in the air seemed to sharpen every sound, every breath, and every feeling. The great palace stood like a fortress against the night, its towers piercing the dark sky, illuminated by the faint glow of lanterns and the soft flicker of candlelight within. Inside, the halls were filled with noblemen and royalty, laughter and music floating through the corridors like a warm current. But for one young princess, the splendor and grandeur of palace life felt stifling, her heart longing for something she couldn't quite name. Her name was Yelena, the beloved daughter of the king, known throughout the kingdom for her beauty and grace. But beneath the royal gowns and golden crowns, Yelena was restless, yearning for something beyond the duties and titles that defined her life. On that cold October night, fate would answer her unspoken desire. In the market square, just beyond the palace walls, a humble craftsman named Mikhail had set up a stall to sell his works. He was known for crafting exquisite pieces of art, from intricate wood carvings to delicate jewelry, each piece a testament to his skill and passion. Mikhail had always been content with his simple life, pouring his soul into his creations. But that night, as he stood before the towering gates of the palace, his heart felt different. There was a stirring inside him, a sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. When Mikhail entered the palace to deliver a piece commissioned by the king, he never imagined his life would change forever. As he made his way through the grand hall, his eyes fell upon the princess, standing by the large windows, bathed in the pale light of the moon. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the world seemed to stop. Yelena's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. She had never seen a man like Mikhail before, strong and kind, with a warmth in his eyes that set her soul alight. Without a word, Yelena gestured for Mikhail to follow her. They slipped out of the palace, unnoticed by the guards, and into the quiet streets of the city. The night air was crisp, but the excitement between them kept the cold at bay. They walked side by side, speaking softly, as though afraid the magic of the night might break if they were too loud. They talked of dreams, of their hopes for the future, and of the world beyond the palace walls. Yelena spoke of her longing for freedom, for a life unburdened by royal expectations. Mikhail shared stories of his craft, of how each piece he created was a reflection of the beauty he saw in the world. The more they talked, the more they realized how deeply they understood one another. There, beneath the stars, two hearts found a connection stronger than anything they had ever known. As they walked further from the palace, they found themselves in a quiet, secluded spot at the edge of the city. They sat on a small bench watching the first snowflakes of the season fall gently from the sky. The pale moonlight, the soft glow of distant lanterns, and the twinkling stars created a scene of breathtaking beauty. But it was not just the night that took their breath away, it was each other. Mikhail reached out, gently taking Yelena's hand in his. Her touch was like fire, warming him from the inside out. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Yelena looked into his eyes, feeling the same pull, the same overwhelming sense that they were meant to find each other. "And you," she replied softly, "you make me feel like I've finally found what I've been searching for." As they sat together, the snow falling silently around them, the night sky above them shifted. The northern lights appeared, casting ribbons of green, pink, and blue across the heavens. Yelena gasped, her eyes wide with awe, as their auras danced above them. Mikhail squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with emotion. "It's as if the heavens are celebrating with us," he said, his voice barely a whisper. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. The beauty of the night, the magic of the lights, and the warmth of their newfound love filled the air around them. It was as if the world had melted away, leaving only the two of them, connected in a way that neither could explain, but both knew was real. As the cold October night wore on, Mikhail and Yelena stayed together, watching the snow and the northern lights, speaking softly of love and dreams, their hearts fully open to one another. For the first time in their lives, they felt complete. It didn't matter that she was a princess and he a craftsman. What mattered was the undeniable bond they had discovered, one that neither time, distance, nor circumstance could break. They knew deep in their hearts that they were falling in love. The cold October night had begun with so much promise, but it ended in a nightmare that Mikhail and Yelena never saw coming. The stillness of their private moment beneath the northern lights was shattered by the heavy footsteps of the king's guards. Their torches cut through the darkness, illuminating the two lovers who had dared to defy the rigid boundaries of royalty. Mikhail felt Yelena's hand tighten around his just before the guards tore them apart. His heart sank as he watched the anguish in her eyes, but there was nothing he could do. He was a mere craftsman, no match for the king's men. They bound his hands roughly and dragged him away, leaving Yelena, the princess, in the cold, her tear-filled eyes pleading silently for them to spare him. They were brought before the king, Yelena's father, whose cold fury was a stark contrast to the warmth and joy that had filled the evening just hours before. His face was a mask of wrath, every line etched with disdain as he gazed at Mikhail. In the eyes of the king, Mikhail was nothing more than a commoner who had dared to overstep his place, to love someone far beyond his station. The king's judgment was swift and merciless. "You will never leave this palace again," he declared to Yelena, his voice sharp as steel. "You are a princess, and you have forgotten your duty. From this moment on, you are confined within these walls." Yelena gasped, her face paling at the harsh decree. She was the king's daughter, yes, but she had never felt more like a prisoner than she did in that moment. Her freedom, her love, and her happiness were all being taken from her in an instant. But worse was to come for Mikhail. The king's gaze shifted to him, a look of disgust and anger that made Mikhail's blood run cold. "As for you," the king said, his words dripping with malice, "you will be sent to the frozen wastelands of Siberia. You will die there, far from the warmth of my daughter's love, and far from this kingdom." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mikhail's heart pounded in his chest, but he held his head high, refusing to show fear in front of the man who sought to destroy him. The image of Yelena's tear-streaked face seared into his mind, her soft whispers of love echoing in his ears even as he was pulled away by the guards. He wanted to scream her name, to tell her that he would find a way back to her, no matter what. That night, Mikhail was thrown into a dark cell, the cold stone walls and iron bars a prelude to the harsher fate that awaited him. He sat in silence, his mind consumed by thoughts of Yelena. She was his light, his hope, and the reason his heart still beat. The memory of her smile, the warmth of her hand in his, kept him from breaking under the weight of his despair. As dawn broke, the guards came for him. They bound his hands and feet and led him to a horse-drawn cart, where he was forced to sit in the biting cold, his breath forming clouds of mist in the freezing air. His destination, Siberia, a land of ice and snow, a place where few survived and fewer returned. Mikhail's heart ached with every passing mile as the cart rattled along the uneven roads. The landscape around him grew bleaker, the warmth of the city fading into a barren expanse of frozen earth and gray skies. Yet, Despite the hopelessness of his situation, his thoughts never strayed from Yelena. The memory of their night together beneath the stars and the falling snow kept his spirit alive. He could see her face, clear as day, even though they were now separated by miles of harsh terrain. He thought of her laugh, her soft voice, and the way she had made him feel as though the world was filled with endless possibilities. He clung to that feeling, even as the cold seeped into his bones, even as the reality of Siberia loomed closer. Mikhail had one goal, one singular focus that burned inside him despite the cold. He would find his way back to Yelena. He would survive whatever Siberia threw at him, and he would not stop until he was once again by her side. The love they had shared was too strong to be broken by distance or hardship, and no king, no matter how powerful, could extinguish the fire that burned in his heart for her. As the cart pressed on, Mikhail gazed out at the endless horizon, a vast expanse of snow and ice stretching before him. He knew the journey ahead would be brutal, but he also knew that his love for Yelena was stronger than the coldest winter, stronger than the harshest fate. And with that thought, he braced himself for the challenges that awaited him in the frozen wilderness. The journey northward toward the frozen lands of Siberia had begun. The cart, rattling along uneven roads, was no more than a wooden cage. Mikhail sat with his hands bound, his body trembling from the cold that seemed to seep into his very soul. The wind howled like a wolf, fierce and unrelenting, biting at his skin. It was a far cry from the warm glow of the city streets where he had once walked alongside Yelena, where they had fallen in love under the soft, falling snow. Days passed in a blur of freezing winds and endless stretches of white. The world had transformed into a wasteland of snow and ice, and the further they traveled, the more desolate it became. The trees grew sparse, the mountains taller and more ominous, their peaks hidden beneath layers of ice. Mikhail felt as if the very earth was conspiring to crush his hope, but he held onto Yelena's image with everything he had. Each night, they stopped to rest, the guards setting up camp while Mikhail was left tied to the cart, shivering beneath thin blankets. His breath clouded in the air, and the cold pierced him to his bones, but his mind never strayed from Yelena. The memory of her smile, the sound of her laugh, the warmth of her touch, they were the only things that kept him from slipping into despair. In his heart, he whispered promises to her. He would survive this. He would find his way back. But the journey was cruel. After several days, they crossed into the icy wilderness of Siberia. The landscape became harsher, the wind colder, the nights longer. The days stretched into a painful monotony of white snow and bitter cold. Frozen rivers snaked through valleys, and the vast plains seemed to go on forever, unyielding and endless. At times, Mikhail felt the weight of hopelessness pressed down on him, but then he would remember Yelena, her face, her voice, and the fire in his heart would burn again. There were moments of respite, brief flashes of beauty that reminded him of why he fought so hard to survive. The auroras, like the ones they had watched together, appeared again in the sky, their colors lighting up the night with a dazzling display of pinks and greens. For a moment, Mikhail could almost feel Yelena's presence beside him, as if she were watching the lights from the palace, thinking of him. The sight stirred something deep inside him, a reminder that love could exist even in the most barren places. But soon, the small moments of beauty gave way to the unforgiving reality of Siberia. The guards were relentless, pushing further into the frozen wasteland, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Mikhail's body grew weaker, his legs numb from the cold, his hands bound so tightly he could barely feel his fingers. His hope began to flicker like a dying flame, but still, he refused to let it go out completely. One night, they stopped near a frozen lake, its surface shimmering like glass beneath the light of the moon. The cold was unbearable, and Mikhail's body trembled uncontrollably, his breath shallow and painful. He felt as though the ice in the lake was creeping up through his body, threatening to freeze him from the inside out. But as he sat there, staring out at the frozen expanse, he saw something that reignited the flame inside him. Across the lake, in the distance, he spotted a lone figure. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but as he stared harder, the figure grew clearer. It was a traveler, wrapped in furs, walking slowly across the frozen landscape. For the first time in days, Mikhail felt something other than cold. He felt hope. That figure represented more than just another person. It represented life, movement, and the possibility of escape. Mikhail's mind raced. If someone could survive in this frozen wilderness, perhaps he could too. Perhaps if he could break free from the guards, he could find a way to reach that figure, and together, they could navigate this brutal land. That night, as the guards slept, Mikhail lay awake, his thoughts consumed by the image of that traveler and the hope that had been reignited in his heart. He began to plot his escape. The road ahead was still long, and the dangers were many, but he was determined to find his way back to Yelena. The frozen wilderness had tested him, had pushed him to the brink of despair, but it had not broken him. With each breath of icy air, Mikhail swore to himself that he would survive. He would not die in this desolate place. He would endure the snow, the ice, and the cold. He would find his way back to Yelena, no matter the cost. And with that thought, as the icy winds howled around him, Mikhail's heart beat stronger than it had in days. Like and subscribe if you want to know what happens next.